They laughed when the ground crew tech walked past the flight line, said she couldn't even start an F-16, let alone fly one. One hotshot pilot slapped a crumpled $1,000 bill on the table, bet she wouldn't last 5 minutes in the cockpit. By the end of the day, that same F-16 would be the only thing standing between the base and an attack from the sky, and she would be the one flying it. But before we start, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what's the most powerful story of redemption you've ever heard? Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning heat clung to Falcon Point Air Base like a heavy blanket. Engines roared overhead as the last pair of F-16s from Vulture 3 skimmed low over the runway, their wheels screeching as they touched down. The air shimmered above the tarmac, carrying the acrid tang of jet fuel and scorched rubber. At the far end of the strip, away from the noise and chatter, Alyssa Ward walked with a slow, measured pace. Her coveralls were streaked with oil and dust, the knees worn from hours crouched under open fuselages. A battered toolbox rattled in her grip, its metal sides clanging with every step. She had once worn a flight suit instead helmet under her arm, call sign painted on the side of a canopy. 4 years ago, over the East China Sea, she'd been a combat pilot in the thick of an engagement no one in this base even knew had happened. A missile fragment had torn through her left shoulder, and 8 months of recovery had stripped her of the medical clearance to fly. When she returned, the Air Force had offered her a desk. She refused. Instead, she took a slot in maintenance, checking radar arrays, swapping circuit boards, keeping other pilots birds in the sky. It should have been quiet work, but Falcon Point's younger flyers had a way of stirring the air. That morning, 3 of them drifted toward her as she leaned into an open avionics panel. Lieutenant Collier led the pack, still smelling of afterburner heat from his sortie. "Hey, Ward," he called over the whir of a portable fan. "You know which end of this thing is?" The front laughter rolled from his wingman, easy and sharp. She didn't look up. Her hand moved steadily over the wiring loom, tightening a terminal. Another voice joined in: Peterson, fresh from pilot training. Bet she couldn't even start the engines now. Collier grinned, sensing an audience. "Tell you what," he said, flicking a coin in his palm. $1,000 says you can't take that Falcon through a level 3 sim run without tripping a single warning light. It was the kind of challenge designed to get a reaction. Alyssa kept her eyes on the work, letting the words hang. The hum of the hangar filled the silence until she heard one more jab from the back. "Come on, ma'am. You're maintenance now. Leave the flying to us." She closed the panel with a click and straightened. Her gaze met Collier's, steady, unblinking. "Level 3, she asked quietly. "Which scenario?" "Low-altitude evasion," he said, confident. It was the course that had chewed up 2 of his own classmates last week: constant terrain shifts, radar threats, and simulated missile locks. Speed was survival. Hesitation meant failure. Every face nearby turned toward her, sensing the shift in the air. She could have walked away. Instead, she set the toolbox down on the concrete with a dull metallic thud. "Fine," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. One word, and the hangar seemed to hold its breath. Collier's smile widened as he motioned toward the training wing. The tactical simulator room was cool and dim, the hum of electronics mixing with the faint smell of coffee left too long on a burner. An F-16 Block 50 cockpit shell sat in the center, its canopy open, wrapped in a halo of monitors. Flight data scrolled across a side screen, already set to the course. The young pilots crowded in behind her, phones raised. Jokes were traded under their breath, light and careless. Collier took a seat at the instructor's console, ready to watch her stumble. Alyssa slid into the cockpit as if she'd never left one. Her fingers found switches by muscle memory, each movement economical, deliberate. Battery on, avionics live, HUD check. The simulator canopy closed with a soft hiss. She adjusted the seat height, set the radar to terrain following mode, and nudged the throttle to idle. No hesitation, no wasted motion. The countdown flashed: 3, 2, 1. She pushed the throttle forward, the simulated roar filling her ears. The horizon tilted as she dropped to 500 feet, skimming virtual ridgelines. Missile lock warning, 2 blips on the scope. She banked hard right. Countermeasures deployed in a clean burst. The lock vanished, replaced by the rising edge of a canyon wall. A snap roll. Nose down, throttle back. Her breathing stayed even, eyes flicking from HUD to radar to the ghostly edge of the terrain on the screen. Every move was anticipatory, like she'd already flown this path 100 times. Outside the cockpit, the room had gone still. The grins faded. The phones lowered. Someone whispered, "She's not even breaking a sweat." Halfway through, the hardest section loomed a narrow pass with wind shear programmed to shove the aircraft sideways. She corrected with a light touch on the stick, throttle dancing between 70 and 80%. The warning lights stayed dark. Final turn a pop-up threat at 2 o'clock. She rolled inverted, dropped altitude to mask behind a bluff, then came back level in perfect line with the exit waypoint. The HUD blinked mission complete. Score 97 out of 100, the highest posted at Falcon Point in the last month. Silence filled the room like fog. Alyssa powered down the systems, unlatched the canopy, and pulled off the helmet. She set it gently on the console, eyes on no one. "Your sim's HUD is 2 degrees off to the left," she said evenly. "You might want to fix that." Then she stepped out, boots ringing against the metal floor. No one moved to block her path. Even Collier stayed in his chair, eyes fixed on the score still glowing on the screen. Back in the hangar, the sunlight felt hotter, the air heavier. Alyssa picked up her toolbox and walked toward the open bays, her posture as calm as it had been that morning. Only now, the quiet around her carried a different weight. A few of the younger techs exchanged glances, whispers following her out of earshot. Someone finally asked, "Who is she?" Really? No one had an answer. Across the hangar, Major Daniel Cross watched her go. He'd been at Falcon Point long enough to remember names from old mission rosters, and something in the way she'd handled that stick had just confirmed a suspicion he hadn't voiced in years. She disappeared around the corner, the rattle of her toolbox fading into the hum of the base. Above, another pair of jets screamed into the sky. But in that hangar, everyone's thoughts were still on the woman who'd just rewritten their measure of skill. By midday, the heat over Falcon Point Air Base shimmered like a sheet of glass. Inside the maintenance hangar, the hum of generators mixed with the high-pitched whine of diagnostic tools. Alyssa Ward stood over the open nose cone of an F-16, her hands buried deep in the radar compartment, checking a calibration alignment that was 0.5 millimeter off. Her days followed a rhythm: now morning checks, midday repairs, afternoon training for the new techs. She'd move between bays with a notepad in one pocket and a multimeter in the other, the kind of steady presence no one questioned, but few truly noticed. Yet sometimes, when the hangar went quiet, she'd find herself slipping into the pilot's seat of a parked jet. She'd rest her hands lightly on the stick, gaze drifting beyond the canopy glass toward the sun-baked runway. For a few seconds, she'd see not Guam but an endless horizon, the HUD flickering green with data, and her mind pulling through maneuvers no one else here knew she could still fly. Then she'd pull herself back to the present, step down from the ladder, and get back to work. That evening, the sun dropped low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Most of the crew had gone, leaving the hangar in a softer hush. Major Daniel Cross appeared at the doorway, his boots echoing against the concrete as he approached. "I need an extra set of hands," he said simply, motioning toward a newly delivered F-16. Its paint still gleamed under the overhead lights, but its electronics needed a post-transport check. Alyssa followed without comment, toolbox swinging at her side. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Cross on the wing systems, Alyssa in the cockpit. Then, as he leaned over the fuselage, his voice shifted lower. "Typhoon Ridge," he said, almost like testing the air. Her head turned slightly, but her hands didn't stop. 4 years ago. East China Sea. "You were flying Falcon too." Cross wasn't guessing, he was remembering. She exhaled through her nose, the sound faint over the quiet hum of the avionics. Two hostile fighters had cornered her and her wingman over choppy water. Their AWACS link cut. She dropped one with an AM-9X at close range, and the second with a snap burst of cannon fire in a vertical climb. The victory had cost her. A missile fragment had punched through her left shoulder, shredding muscle and nerves. She'd barely managed to land on a carrier deck before blacking out. 8 months of rehab had followed, with military doctors marking her file as not fit for combat flight. It didn't matter that she could still fly cleaner than most active pilots' paperwork had the final say. By the time she was cleared for duty, her slot in the squadron was gone. Cross didn't press for more. He just nodded, as if fitting another piece into a puzzle he'd been working on for years. "You ever think about coming back?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "Every day," she said. The answer hung there, unadorned, before she returned to the checklist. Outside, the sound of another jet taking off faded into the dark. 2 days later, the atmosphere on base shifted. Briefings grew tense, radios busier. A bulletin from Pacific Command slid across the internal network. Flagged in red, intelligence suggested hostile forces were testing routes toward U.S. territories. Drone swarms fast, low, possibly explosive, had been spotted in maritime zones not far from Guam. Some analysts suspected these were precursors to coordinated strikes on high-value installations. Falcon Point was squarely in that category. The warning didn't come with a date, only a window within weeks. It was enough to tighten the mood in every department. In the mess hall, the talk turned sharp. One junior officer joked that maybe the maintenance crew should practice ducking. The comment drew chuckles from his table but made Alyssa's jaw tighten. She ignored it outwardly, but the words echoed. It wasn't the first time she'd heard the quiet divide between those who fly and those who fix. The younger pilots seemed to think the runway belonged only to them. Collier, flushed from his own recent training scores, still carried himself like the simulator challenge had been a fluke. He spoke loudly about upcoming sorties, about real missions only the active roster could handle. A few of his friends nodded along, their laughter carrying just far enough for her to hear. Major Cross noticed. From his post near the ops board, he watched the casual dismissal, filing it away. He didn't say anything yet, but his gaze lingered on Alyssa a moment longer than usual. The tension grew in quiet ways. Fuel trucks were kept topped off at all hours. The armory cycled missile inventories twice in a single week, far more than routine checks required. On the third morning after the bulletin, the sky was streaked with thin clouds, the air heavy with the smell of the sea. The day began like any other. Alyssa was elbow deep in a radar panel, a new tech beside her taking notes. Somewhere across the field, Collier's voice came faint over the hum, joking about sunbathing until the next scramble. Then the siren shattered the morning. A rising wail rolled across the base, sharp enough to make the hangar walls vibrate. Every head snapped toward the loudspeakers. "Attention all personnel." The intercom barked. Unidentified inbound contacts detected 40 kilometers northeast. Multiple bogies. Low speed. A second later, another voice cut in from the ops center, more clipped. "Probable unmanned aerial systems. Potential high explosive payload." Alyssa set her tools down, wiping her hands automatically as if that could steady her pulse. Around her, techs froze for a heartbeat, then scattered, some toward shelters, others toward the flight line. The new tech by her side looked wide-eyed, waiting for instruction. She pointed him toward the hardened shelter entrance. Then she stepped into the open, eyes tracking the sky beyond the distant tree line. Nothing visible yet, just a thin haze and the glint of sunlight on the water. Across the base, the radar dome's servos whined as it shifted azimuth. Inside the ops building, controllers fed data to the command net. The contact report updated more than a dozen inbound UAVs, holding a tight formation. And then came the part that made every senior officer's voice sharpen, a separate track behind them. Faster, higher, on a different frequency band. Probable manned aircraft. possibly acting as escorts. Within seconds, the alert level jumped. Over the PA, the base commander's order cut through the noise. All scramble-ready pilots to stations. Repeat scramble-ready to stations. But Alyssa knew the roster. 2/3 of the on-call pilots were still off-site, ferrying aircraft back from a joint exercise. Another was grounded with a medical issue. That left a bare handful to cover the airspace, and the bogies were closing fast. The ground crews moved with controlled chaos, towing aircraft into position, arming pylons, running last-second diagnostics. Somewhere to her left, she heard a young crew chief swear under his breath. They didn't have enough jets prepped for the whole intercept package. She took one step toward the nearest ready bay. The scent of hot metal and jet fuel thickened her nose. Her mind mapped the situation like a flight plan vector of approach. Probable intercept point, gaps in coverage. It was instinct, not thought. The kind of calculation she hadn't been asked to make in years. Another siren blast split the air. The UAVs were at 35 kilometers now, closing fast. Somewhere beyond them, the shadow of their escorts held steady, just out of visual range. Alyssa's pulse kicked up, her muscles taut. Around her, people were shouting, moving, strapping into their roles. But she could feel the thin edge of time, the way it always felt just before a fight found you. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just a drill, and it wasn't going to wait for the right people to be in the right place. Falcon Point was about to be tested for real. The sirens screamed over Falcon Point Air Base, their pitch rising until it seemed to press against the inside of Alyssa's skull. Soldiers sprinted in every direction, some toward hardened shelters, others to the flight line where ground crews were scrambling to arm jets. Beyond the perimeter fence, the staccato thump of the base's air defense cannons rolled across the field. White streaks lanced upward, detonating in brief blossoms against the morning haze. A cluster of UAVs burst apart midair, raining fragments into the sea beyond the cliffs. But one drone slipped through, its profile low and erratic, engines whining like a mosquito's scream. The impact came a heartbeat later, an orange flash near the maintenance block, the shockwave slamming into the hangar doors. Alyssa felt the air punch her chest, the floor shifting under her boots. Shouts erupted as dust and debris rained from the rafters. She was already moving before the ringing left her ears. Half the wall of the smaller service shed was gone, its steel siding twisted outward. A young tech lay motionless against a toolbox, another crying out with his leg pinned under a support beam. Alyssa dropped to her knees beside the injured, hooking her arms under his shoulders and dragging him clear of the wreckage. Blood smeared across her sleeve, hot and slick. Her breathing came hard, not from the weight but from the sirens still clawing at her focus. That was when Cross appeared through the haze, his flight cap gone, sweat and dust streaking his face. "We've got 2 minutes to get a bird in the air," he barked, scanning the chaos. "Collier's still stuck on the West Road." "Ward," he caught her eyes, steady despite the noise. "I know you can do it." There was no room for argument. The radar screen in the ops center had probably already painted the enemy's second wave. Alyssa shoved the injured tech toward 2 medics rushing in, then turned and ran with Cross toward the ready base. The nearest F-16 sat in a half-prepped state, ladder still hooked to the cockpit, safety pins dangling from its hardpoints. The crew chief's eyes widened as he saw who was coming. Fuel topped. AMRAAMs loaded. "Vulcan Prime radar just needs sync," he shouted. "Then move." Alyssa was already stepping into the G-suit someone thrust into her hands. The fabric was dusty and torn in places, but it sealed over her torso in seconds. She took the helmet from Cross without a word. Her boots hit the ladder rungs 2 at a time, climbing into the cockpit's tight embrace. 4-point check fuel full, weapons green, radar aligning, flight controls responsive. Her fingers flew over switches, the startup sequence spilling from memory as if the years in maintenance had been a pause, not an ending. The canopy came down with a hiss. She rolled the throttle to idle, heard the turbines whine build into a steady roar. Cross's voice came in over the headset, calm but clipped. "Towers cleared you. Runway 3. Good hunting. She taxied out, the nose swinging toward the long black strip ahead. Beyond the airfield, bursts of anti-air fire still flared, tiny against the wide Pacific sky. The HUD painted icons, multiple UAVs inbound. Altitude low, spread wide. Falcon Point 11, cleared for immediate departure. The tower called. She pushed the throttle full forward, felt the kick as the afterburner lit, the runway blurring beneath her. The nose lifted, the ground dropped away, and she was airborne. The climb lasted seconds before she leveled at treetop height, hugging the contours of the coast. Her radar bloom showed 3 faster contacts behind the UAV cloud enemy fighters. Her mind sketched their likely plan screen the drones until they were too close for intercept. She stayed low, avoiding the sweep of their sensors. The ocean flashed silver under her wing, the airframe rattling as she punched through pockets of warm air rising from the cliffs. Her breathing steadied, long and slow through the mask. Then she pulled back, a sudden climb that bled speed but gave her the altitude to lock the lead fighter. The targeting tones sang in her ears, steady, insistent. Her thumb squeezed the pickle button, and an AIM-120 AMRAAM leapt from the wing with a flare of white fire. The missile carved a perfect arc through the sky and blossomed against the enemy's fuselage. One hostile down. Her threat receiver spiked as the second fighter banked hard toward her position. She rolled into the attack, nose dropping, the world tilting until the horizon spun beneath her canopy. A short burst from the M61 Vulcan sent 20mm shells tearing into the enemy's wing root. Flames erupted, the jet snapping sideways before it vanished in smoke. The third fighter broke high and away, only to run headlong into a waiting F-35 that had raced in from another base. Its missile strike flared bright even in the daylight, and the escort threat was gone. But the UAV swarm still drove forward. Alyssa's radar showed the drones splitting, some heading for the runway, others angling toward the base's fuel storage. Ground-based missiles were intercepting what they could, but too many were still inbound. Her comm crackled. One drone's passed the intercept line heading straight for the fuel depot. She banked hard, the straps biting into her shoulders. A sliver of coastline flashed by beneath her, then open water. The UAV came into view, a dark, insect-like silhouette skimming just above the waves. Range closed in seconds. She lined it up in the HUD, switched to guns, and gave the trigger a 2-second squeeze. The rounds hit dead center, shredding the drone's frame, its payload detonating harmlessly over the sea. Her breath fogged the inside of her mask for a moment before the wind cleared it. She wheeled back toward the airfield, scanning for any remaining threats. The radar was finally clean. On approach, she caught glimpses of smoke still curling from the damaged maintenance shed, medics moving stretcher after stretcher. The runway shimmered in the heat, dotted with scorch marks from intercepted debris. Her landing was smooth, the tires kissing asphalt in a controlled roll. As she taxied in, the canopy lifted, letting in the salt, heavy air. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, the adrenaline not yet spent. Cross stood near the edge of the apron, his expression unreadable as he watched her shut the engine down. Alyssa climbed out, boots hitting the ladder. Her face was set, calm as if she'd just returned from a routine drill. But in her eyes there was fire, a sharp, unspoken message that no one here would forget. The fires were out by nightfall. Only thin columns of smoke still curled from the maintenance shed, carrying the smell of scorched metal across the field. The base felt smaller now, its movements slower, as if every person carried the weight of what could have been. Damage reports trickled in 2 buildings with structural cracks, several hangar doors dented from shrapnel. A handful of vehicles were scorched where debris had landed, their paint blistered by heat. But the list of the injured carried no fatal entries, and that, everyone knew, was the line between disaster and survival. In the operations room, a pair of senior officers sat before a wide projection of Alyssa's gun camera footage. They replayed the intercept from the moment she lifted off, her maneuvers sharp but measured, every decision fitting into the rhythm of a pilot who had never lost her edge. No wasted moves, no panicked inputs, just precision. One colonel leaned back, eyes narrowing as the UAV over the ocean bloomed into fragments under her guns. He muttered something under his breath, half to himself, about textbook execution under live fire. The others just watched in silence, each one marking a mental note they'd carry into the next briefing. Elsewhere, the tech bay had returned to a muted hum. The clang of tools and murmur of conversation felt different now, less casual, more deliberate. Alyssa sat at one of the long tables, still in her undershirt from the G-suit, her hair pulled back, a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hands. The door opened, and Collier stepped in, his boots scuffed against the floor, his gaze avoiding hers at first. In his hand, a worn envelope bent around a thick fold of paper. He set it on the table in front of her, the faint smell of jet fuel clinging to it. Inside, the $1,000 bill from the simulator bet creased, sweat-stained, and unspoken for. He didn't offer words, just met her eyes for a single heartbeat and gave a small nod. She held his gaze, then picked up the envelope and stood. At the corner of the room, a wooden donation box sat beneath a small sign, "For the families of the injured." She slid the money in without ceremony, the bill vanishing into the shadows of the box. When she turned back, Collier was already leaving. His shoulders were set differently, his usual swagger muted. The door clicked shut behind him, and the hangar swallowed the sound. The following morning, Cross found her in the corner of the hangar, bent over an open avionics panel. He had a folder in his hand, the kind stamped with the kind of authority that rarely asked permission. She straightened as he approached, wiping grease from her fingers with a rag. Without preamble, he handed it over. Inside, official orders, her name printed above a line reinstating her as an active duty pilot, assigned to Falcon Point as a combat flight instructor. It was the kind of offer people fought careers to earn. She read it once, slowly, then again, her eyes lingering on the signature line. Finally, she closed the folder and handed it back. "I'll stay here," she said, her voice steady. Cross's brow furrowed, but she continued. "If the time comes, I'll be ready to take off. But for now, these people need planes in the air as much as they need them in one piece." Cross studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. There was no argument in his expression, just understanding. He tucked the folder under his arm and left her to the open fuselage and the scent of hydraulic fluid. By late afternoon, the air above the base had quieted again. Only the distant thrum of a patrol flight carried over the water. The sun was sliding low, spilling gold across the runway. Alyssa walked out to the far end of the strip where an F-16 sat alone, its canopy open, the skin of its wings still warm from earlier sorties. She climbed onto the ladder, a rag in one hand, and began wiping away the last streaks of salt and dust from the canopy glass. The rhythmic motion was unhurried, almost meditative. From that vantage, the Pacific stretched unbroken, the horizon a thin blade of fire under the setting sun. The reflection caught in the canopy showed her face not the guarded mask she'd worn since her injury, but something sharper, clearer, not hiding anymore. The wind carried the scent of the ocean and the faint tang of jet exhaust still clinging to the concrete. She paused, resting one hand on the frame of the cockpit, eyes on the endless sky beyond. Her fingers curled just slightly, as if feeling the ghost of a throttle there. Somewhere behind her, a hangar door rolled shut with a deep mechanical rumble. Ahead, the sky darkened toward violet, the last light glinting off the jet's nose. It felt less like an ending and more like a mark on a calendar, one day among many she knew could change in an instant. She finished with the canopy and stepped down, boots thudding softly on the ladder's rungs. Her shadow stretched long across the tarmac, merging with the shadow of the aircraft. For a moment, the two seemed inseparable. Alyssa glanced once more toward the sea. Her eyes held the quiet of someone who had seen both the cost of action and the cost of waiting. When she turned back toward the hangar, the faintest trace of a smile touched her lips. She wasn't in hiding anymore. She was exactly where she needed to be, hands ready, mind clear, and a runway always in reach. If the call came, she wouldn't need convincing. The light on the horizon thinned to a final line before the sun dropped away. Engines in the distance rolled low, fading toward silence. And at Falcon Point Air Base, Alyssa Ward walked off the runway, leaving the jet gleaming in the last light ready for the next time the sky demanded her.